to the launch of Ask Dalya Live. Get your grant-related questions answered here every second and fourth Wednesday of the month at noon Pacific time. In each session of Ask Dalya Live, I answer grant-related questions that folks have previously asked me. If you would like to ask a question today, please enter it in the comment box below, and I'll answer it either today or in a future Ask Dalya Live session. If you'd rather just listen in, that's fine too. Just to let you know, these sessions are recorded, so if you miss one or if you want to refer back to a session, look for the recordings on Facebook or my other online channels. Now, a little about me. I've been a nonprofit grant writer for nearly 25 years, and I'm the award-winning author of Writing to Make a Difference, 25 Powerful Techniques to Boost Your Community Impact. I'm also the instructor for the new on-demand course series. It's co-created with TechSoup, and it's called Grant Writing and Management. It's designed to be your starter kit for grant success. You can find out more in the description below. I've learned my share of lessons in the grant world, and I now want to share them with you. In our brief time together today, I'll start with the answer to a big question that many of my clients have asked me, and that is, how can you tell if your organization is ready to attract grants? I know your organization is probably eager to attract some grant money to help support your good work, and that's exactly what grants are there for. But are you ready to take on all that's involved? After all, if you're not really ready to enter the grant world, you will just waste a lot of time, energy, and maybe even money. I've seen many nonprofit organizations make the mistake of not preparing properly and then suffering the consequences. So before diving in, let's consider a few things about the grant world that you need to know. Number 1. Grants generally take up to 6 to 12 months to be awarded after you apply, and that's not counting the time it takes to prepare your application. This is often too long to wait if you have an urgent project. Sometimes board members or even executive directors are unfamiliar with grant seeking, and they may think that grants offer a quick and easy way to fund the organization. This is generally not the case. Number 2, grant makers often change their priorities and can be unreliable. You don't want your organization to be dependent on only 1 or 2 grants that could disappear next year. You can protect your organization's well-being by having many different sources of income in case any suddenly slow down or dry up entirely. Other sources of income might include major individual donors, events, fees for services you provide, or social enterprises you run. So any grant strategy should be part of a much larger fundraising plan. Okay, number 3. Grants are only temporary and they have no guarantee of continuing. Your organization needs to be sustainable. That is, you need to have a strategy to ensure that you can survive or thrive past the duration of any given grant. While grants can and should be part of the mix, you can't expect them to be anything more than a short-term fix for a year or 2. And if they end up being long-term, hey, that's great, you'll be pleasantly surprised. Living grant to grant is like living paycheck to paycheck without a guaranteed job. That's not a good idea if you can help it. And finally, number 4, grants are actually not free money. There's a lot of work involved in seeking and managing different types of grants. Your organization has to decide if it's worth dedicating the needed time, effort, and other resources in exchange for the possible cash. In addition, some grants come with strings attached. You have to consider the agreement you're making to accept the money from any particular funder. For example, sometimes a funder demands too much work in exchange for a grant that will only partially cover your expenses. Okay, now that you know what you're dealing with when it comes to grants, let's talk about what it takes to show funders that your organization is well positioned to seek and manage grants. The idea here is to prepare to show that you are worthy of a grant maker's investment. Think about it. If you are considering making an investment in anything at any time, you probably would be looking for a good return on that investment. You need to show that your organization is credible and well run and able to use a grant effectively. Now, before I tell you about what I call the 8 information essentials, let me remind you to submit your questions below, and I'll answer them as soon as I can get to them. One moment while I take a sip of water. Okay. Now let's look at the 8 information essentials that you're going to need at your fingertips. I think you'll find that as a grant seeker, you will need to know a lot about your organization. Now, the first thing you'll need is official nonprofit tax status. You'll need either your own nonprofit status, or if you're not yet a separate nonprofit, you'll need a fiscal sponsor that agrees to administratively sponsor your organization in exchange for a fee. At a minimum, you will need to have certifications on the federal and state levels, and some require a county or a city business license or other documentation. FYI, some grant makers only are interested in organizations that have been officially in existence for at least a few years. So if you're younger than that, you may need to wait to approach those specific funders, but there are many more out there. Second, you'll want to make sure your organization has a clear, unique mission. Think about how your organization plays a special or unique role in your field. If your mission statement could describe any other organization that is similar to yours, think again. You'll need to clarify what you set out to do in your community in terms so clear that anyone can understand. Periodically revisit your mission to make sure it continues to be relevant and inspiring, even as times and circumstances change. You know what I mean. Third, you'll need an active, financially supportive board of directors. Of course, your organization has a board of directors already, but how active are they? Do they meet regularly, and do they contribute financially in a meaningful way? Are they connected to the community you serve? It's best to have a good variety of folks on your board who are familiar with the various parts of your organization. If your board also includes some current or former clients, and it's representative of the ethnic and socioeconomic communities you serve, you're already off to a great start. Fourth, you're going to need the appropriate financial information. You'll need to be able to produce lots of financial documents like budgets, expense and revenue reports, IRS filings, balance sheets, and the like. You also need to show that you are on solid financial ground, even if you're just starting out. I know this can be tough. So if your organization is in debt of any sort, you're most likely going to have to get out of debt before you can pursue new grants. If you're behind on your IRS filings or you haven't passed a recent financial audit, those issues need to be cleared up. On a related note, funders want to know that you have multiple sources of support. So you need to be able to show a solid history of financially sustaining yourself. Even if your organization is new, you need to be able to show some sort of community support that helps to keep your head above water. After all, no one wants to pour money into a sinking ship. Fifth, you're going to need to be prepared to propose at least one priority program with a budget. You should know that the vast majority of grants are given for specific programs or projects for only 1 year at a time. So pursuing that kind of funding requires that you're clear about your own priorities over the next year or more. With that in mind, you'll need to divide your work into specific units called programs or projects, with realistic expectations for a 1 year period. These bite-sized chunks need to be centered on your strengths or core competencies. If your organization is very new, you may only have one program to start with, and that's fine. But even in that case, I encourage you to break it down. Remember that each program or project needs a realistic budget. That is, the money you'll need to run the program or project and where you expect to find those funds. Whew, that's lots of program planning, and definitely you want to do that before you seek grants. Okay, so number 6, the sixth information essential is your method of quantitative or qualitative measurement or evaluation. Funders want to know what's working and what's not. They'll want to know the quantitative results of your work, that is, for example, how many people you served in your community, that's the numbers, and the quality of the impact that you made. Funders often call these short-term and long-term measurable outcomes. Then there's the 7th essential item you'll need. It's a track record of success, or at least the right leadership to make that happen. You're going to need to be clear on how your organization or project has already made a positive difference in your community. That is, what results have you already seen? There are lots of ways to tell the story of your organization's past that can lead to a bright future. And finally, the 8th essential is a strategic plan of some kind. Even if you can't carry out a full-blown strategic planning process, your board and staff can at least envision a general outline of where you're headed over the next 1 to 3 years. This doesn't need to be fancy. You just need to demonstrate that your work is coherent and realistic in accomplishing your mission, given the context you're working in. For a more in-depth discussion of the 8 information essentials, check out my online course linked below. There, I help you assess your organization and address any barriers you may face as you prepare for the grant-seeking journey ahead. Now, let's answer a few other questions that were submitted this past week. The first question comes from Veronica, as she was filling out a state charitable solicitation form, and she was unsure of her organization's federal tax status. Well, I can tell you that if your organization has received 501c3 status from the IRS and you have an EIN or Employer Identification Number, then you are considered exempt from federal tax. Not necessarily other taxes, but definitely federal tax. Okay, the second question comes from Sue Ann, and she asked, other than general operation grants, are there any grants specifically for executive directors? Well, Sue Ann, you are right that general operating grants that support the entire organization's ongoing expenses, and that can include the executive director. Now, my guess is that your executive director is either directly or indirectly involved in at least some of your organization's programming. So if that's the case, you can usually include that percentage of the executive director's time in the specific program budgets that you prepare for your grant proposals. Also, if your ED is involved in any capacity building or strategic planning work, your organization may be eligible for capacity building grants, especially from your previous funders. Okay, question number 3 comes from Tabile. I hope that I'm pronouncing that right, Tabile. Tabile said that funders often ask who the beneficiaries are of a grant, especially around training of staff, who will then go into the communities to do the work. Tabile, you are very right that funders are very focused on the beneficiaries of the grant. So it sounds like in your case you actually have 2 sets of beneficiaries. That is, the first one is the community residents, because they ultimately benefit when your staff works with them. Your second one is your staff themselves, and they benefit because they receive training and they can then work with many more people, maybe even beyond any specific grant that you're applying for. That wraps up today's session of Ask Dalya Live. Thank you for joining me. I'm here every second and fourth Wednesday of the month at noon Pacific time. Be sure to stop by again and tell your friends and colleagues about Ask Dalya Live. Recordings are all available on the Writing for Community Success Facebook page under Videos and on my website, writingtomakeadifference.com. Got a question for a future session of Ask Dalya Live? Just use the link below. Please follow me on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Visit my website and sign up for my newsletter for more tips. The links all appear below. I look forward to hearing about your successes and answering more of your questions during the next session of Ask Dalya Live on Wednesday, May 26th. See you then. Bye for now.